Well, there we go. There we go. I'm gonna have to cut this out. Yeah, sorry guys, I was moving around different screens and it got the wrong sound. So, I wasn't muted. The default was incorrect. So I unmuted, but then I still wasn't heard. Anyway, how you guys doing? Always off to a professional start. Yeah, I was gonna do a bit more with my lighting. I guess I'm a little bit overexposed and my glasses look really, really wonky. So yeah, we're gonna talk today about the so much politics. How to feel about what happened with Trump. It's kind of a complicated thing. I mean, it was pretty much never going to be the case. Is that for life? It was pretty much never going to be the case that Trump was going to get convicted. So I think that's one thing we have to keep in mind. That it was just never going to happen. So the question is, like, what happened? What can we glean from what did happen? Why aren't my lights doing what I want them to? All right, that one. Okay, that one. That one. What about this one? I want to give. Oh, there we go. There we go. That's the one. How's that for lighting? Should do this stuff before the show, shouldn't I? Anyway, yeah, I know. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate the information, but we've moved on from being muted now. Alright, thanks. I do want to do a whole show being muted, that's true. So let me just adjust a bit more on the light while I talk, and then we'll be done. Yes, so it's an interesting point in American history because we really are looking at something we haven't seen, at least during our lifetimes, which is the collapse of a political party. And now I've messed my lights up, and they're going to fall over. All right, that's fine. You can see me, right? That's ultimately all we. And I wanted to talk a little bit today about, what was the topic again? I'm just kidding. Post-impeachment and the GOP civil war. There is, yeah, I don't know how you're going to get a Republican Party to come together after this. So I guess, first things. I want to say hi to some people in the chat, by the way, before we get started. Yeah, voice woman camera TV. Y'all are hilarious. What is going on with my computer? Who is in the chat? Transgamer Girl, hello. Nil Magnificent, Magnifico. A Lonely Wolf, hi, it's been a while. Good to see you back. Paul Mama Sid is here. Rumor with Legs. That's a cool name. DNF fan, Lace Argar. Hello there. Who else? I think I might see any other names. That's terrorism's bro. I'm a bit quiet. All right, I can make myself a bit louder. So hopefully that will be louder. Now that we got all of the bugs worked out, and we have said hello, greetings, and various whatnots. Yes, it was an interesting week in American politics, to say the least. We saw the fastest impeachment in American history this week, and pretty much the result was a foregone conclusion because of the grip that Donald Trump has over the Republican Party. So I want to talk a little bit about this and about the fact that the Trumpists are winning and the GOP have really no one but themselves to blame. I was actually thinking maybe, like, well, I don't know. Like, I've got a lot of things on the go about making a video describing this fascism spiral that the GOP have put themselves in as a consequence of gerrymandering and appealing to white grievances and really making their base be based on racial division and divide and conquer. And that while that is good for your party in the short term, it's terrible for the country in the short term, and it's terrible for your party in the long run, as we're seeing. Okay, what was the point of an impeachment trial if there wasn't any chance of getting a conviction? It is, all right. Politics is more doing politics, shall we say, doing a politics, as Kevin said, is a lot more than just like getting a specific outcome here. So let's look at this. Why bother to try Trump if we were never going to get a conviction anyway? Here's the question from like a historical point of view. What if there wasn't an impeachment? And what if there wasn't a trial? And Donald Trump was able to walk away from organizing an insurrection with no pushback from the Congress, with no opportunity for members of his own party to stand up to him. That would have been far more dangerous. Winking and nodding at that kind of political attack invites further attacks. It legitimizes the attack. Occasionally, when you do politics, if you can't get the outcome you want, it's still important to do something symbolically to show your values, to demonstrate where you stand, and also to provide a point of focus and leadership for other people who think like you. I think it was incredibly important to go through this symbolic process, shall we say, because the Congress was attacked, and there needs to be some sort of reaction if you want to maintain a democracy. So the House acted, but they didn't really do the trial. They looked at the body of evidence and wrote up the articles and passed it on. The most important part of this was the trial. The most important part for history, for our country, for shaping this event in our collective memories, was the stories told by the House managers in the course of the trial. Because without them, we would have not had the voices of the service workers and food workers of the Capitol in the record. We would not have had the experiences of members of staff. Most are, like low-level, entry-level, aspirational people in there. We would not have a permanent record of the service provided by Eugene Goodman in preventing what could have been a constitutional crisis. Now, let me put it to you this way, right? The Republicans look at this from a sort of poo-poo pop, this didn't stop our process. Both the House and the Senate came back into session, even though their place of business had become a crime scene. Right? Now, let's imagine what would have happened to the election process, the whatever they did when they approved the electors, when they did through the process of electors. Let's say that they got Mitt Romney. What if the mob had gotten to Mitt Romney? And even if they hadn't kidnapped him and taken him away, what if they would have beaten him and sent him to the hospital? Or what if they would have gotten to Nancy Pelosi and abused her? What if they got to Mike Pence? The Senate would not have gone back into session that day. The House would not have gone back into session that day, and the election would have hung in the balance. Right? So by coincidence, by mere happenstance, it was only a delay of 6 hours. But had they assaulted members of Congress, they could have put it off even longer. They could have found this way to disrupt the process even more profound. And so we can't let this stand. We can't just go, oh, this is Trump, and wink it away. And I'm not saying that's what you're suggesting. But even in the face of defeat, it's still important to stand up to the monsters. And that process of telling those stories and putting the larger story together, putting the pieces together for Americans who don't have time, like I do, to just obsessively watch the news, right? House managers very clearly laid out, here is his intention to stop the election. Here is him organizing the rally. Here is him acting at the rally to incite the crowd. And we know he wanted incitement to violence because after the violence started, he did nothing for hours. Donald Trump will go down as the president who received, until this point, the most bipartisan impeachment vote in history. And whether or not you get the conviction, and 2/3 is a super high majority. I mean, it's a super high bar. There are only a couple things in the Constitution that require 2/3 majority for a reason. It's very difficult. That it doesn't mean it's futile. Doesn't mean it's futile. So I hope that answered your question. Thank you for letting me rant. Yeah, it is political theater, but sometimes theater is what counts. The swearing in of the president doesn't happen when he or she takes the oath. It happens when they sign the piece of paper. When people get married, they don't get married at the ceremony when they say the words. They actually are officially married when they sign the piece of paper. But there is an important social construct of legitimacy and validity that we imbue these symbolic acts with. And by going through these formal processes, they carry a greater weight. And they have a sort of seriousness that we assign them. Whether it be a marriage ceremony or trying to think of other symbolic things, a baptism isn't really the same. Like maybe like a naming, like some cultures have parties when you name the child, they sort of like are welcomed into the community, that kind of thing. A graduation is a perfect example, I guess, of that kind of ritual. You don't, like your degree, you earned your degree whether or not you walk across the stage with the robes on and the funny hat. But the point is the ceremony that acknowledges what it represents. And I'm a big believer in these kinds of ceremonies, actually. I think they're very important culturally to link us together. And it's one of the reasons I was so in favor of marriage equality, because denying people that sort of social validity is a terrible form of discrimination. Whether or not I think marriage is a great institution is sort of irrelevant. Its social weight carries with it a kind of legitimacy that only marriage provides in terms of legal rights and things in society. So, but at the end of the day, this party is still the party of Donald Trump. And, we're going to talk about Mitch McConnell, but yeah, let's talk about the 7 senators who voted to impeach. So, actually, I don't have those up. I know a couple of their names, but let's get up the official list. Because these guys and ladies, 7 impeachment. Oh, and yeah, Mitch McConnell. There's votes. Yeah, I think that would get me close enough. All right, the 7 senators who voted with the Dems. Let's have a look at who these people were, because this will tell us a little bit of something about the Republican Party. What is going on? I'll bring this. No, I don't want any of that. Who do we have here? Richard Burr of North Carolina, Susan Collins, Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, Murkowski of Alaska, Romney, Ben Sasse, and Pat Toomey. And now, the Magnificent Seven. That's very, 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 very generous. Philosophy of language deep cut. Yeah. I actually, in that, I was convinced by John Searle. That was particularly, I think The Reality of Social Construction by John Searle was in his book. What did I do? No, F10, F11. Okay, there we go. It was just one of those two. Either F10 or F11. Reality of Social Construction. No, I don't want that one. Anyway, he talks about the way that, let's say, paper money doesn't have value, but it represents value. A marriage certificate isn't a marriage, but it represents a marriage. And so the way that we, in our construction of our social realities, still require some sort of material representation of these immaterial norms that we share, our shared common values. And that's very important. So like having a marriage certificate represents that. Having cash represents the value of money and whatnot. So, all right, Senator Richard Burr, I think, is retiring. So he is basically freed from the terrors of, I know one of these guys is retire. Yeah, retiring. That's what I was looking for. Yep. Okay, he's planning to retire next year. It's amazing how often Republicans will do the right thing once they no longer have to stand for office. You know? Now they don't often do the right thing, but there's definitely a link between not having to pander to the fascists in your party and feeling liberated to do the right thing. Hey, Matthew, good to see you. Hope you're doing well. So he was basically freed because he doesn't have to worry about the voters. Susan Collins could not possibly vote to acquit after she embarrassed herself by saying that Trump learned his lesson the last time. I mean, honestly, I don't even understand how people in Maine could vote for Susan Collins at this point. She's a joke. And I get when you have a senator who's there for a long time, people are like, term limits. But the thing is that a senator, people do feel a relationship they build up, especially if they like them and they're the same party. You can get a real sort of like, oh yeah, Susan, she blah blah blah. You get a lot of goodwill. But there's just no way that she could possibly vote to acquit and survive that. I think Lisa Murkowski has signaled for a long time. I'm avoiding Bill Cassidy for a reason because I don't know much about him. Lisa Murkowski has kind of been on that Ben Sass, Mitt Romney axis of the GOP in the Senate for a while. So that was a nice, I mean, not unexpected, but pleasant, like result. Mitt Romney, obviously, he was the only person to vote for impeachment the last time around. So he was probably the only, I knew we had one. Going into this, we knew we had one. So Ben Sass has become an increasing critic of Trump, and I think he just won his re-election bid, right? I think he was up last time. Let's just see. Let's double check these guys. Ben Sass re-elected with a hyphen in there, even. If I could spell re-elected right. Let's see. When ran for re-election, when is he up again? His current term ends in 2027. That can't be right. Yeah, 2015. He assumed office in the 15th. Yeah, so he's far enough away, and he's also kind of that country club wing of the GOP that doesn't want to squat, I think, with the people who, have Confederate flags in their front yard. Pat Toomey was, I think, kind of a surprise as far as I'm concerned. And who's the other guy? Bill Cassidy. Yes. This guy, I think, is going to probably see if he's retiring as well. Because again, Bill Cassidy retiring. I wouldn't be at all surprised if he is going to retire. No, well, let's see. He's censured by his hometown Republican Party because cancel culture. GOP cancel culture. And let's see. They say he's going to retire. Oh, okay, no. We'll have to see what happens with that. Overall, I was surprised. I thought maybe they would get 5 or 6. I kind of thought that it was going to be Romney, Collins, Murkowski. Ben Sass was making some noises. And then, and that was probably the 4 I had. But this is actually a win. I know he wasn't convicted, but politically, this was a win. And I think that it was a win for democracy. Right? I'll talk about how the Trumpists are winning in the GOP. But for America, given, let's say, the craven political hypocrisy of Mitch McConnell, that the fact that in a party that focuses so much on obedience and loyalty and submission, that 7 GOP Senate members, after Trump is out of office, finally had the courage to break with him, given that he is still the most popular candidate in their party. He's the most popular person in their party. Hi, Monty Lou. Welcome. And also HK. How's you doing? And did I say hello to the Lucky Wanderer? I don't know if I did so. Hello, good morning. This was actually a massive crack in the facade of GOP unity. That said, there is a coming civil war in the GOP. Tim Pool keeps talking about a civil war. I'm not talking about a hot civil war. I'm talking about like a cold civil war here. But there is a civil war coming in the GOP. It is irrefutable. It is destiny. They have committed themselves to a path of a downward spiral of fascism. And there's simply no way they can put the brakes on this anymore. So first, let's talk about where Trump stands in the party. Because at the end of the day, you have to ask the question, where do your loyalties lie? Did they lie with the country, or do they lie not even with the party, but with a man, with a single man? And without a doubt, the GOP is still the party of Trump. He will still wield a lot of power. And I think Mitch McConnell and maybe some other elite institutional, like I'll call them the political elites, all right? And by political elites, I mean the people who are incredibly rich, who have country club memberships, who, easily just drop hundreds and thousands of dollars on something without worrying about it. We're talking about, basically like, I don't want to say bourgeois, because bourgeois implies they work. These are the the rich at leisure, the people whose entire existence is funded by other people's labor, and then they walk around trying to figure out how to maintain their power over, right? Economically, that's their perspective. Socially, obviously, it's about the white dominance of political power and economic power and social status in America. And this particular portion of the GOP has run the party, basically this whole time. You gotta think back to Reagan and Bob Dole and John McCain, and there's this sort of like gentleman's club, a very exclusive white-only gentleman's club, where they're very sophisticated and they're educated at very prestigious universities and they've run businesses. They're the heads of things, and their aim was to whip up their white populist base into a frenzy of hate, keep them always fearful, agitated, and angry, and pointed at the Democrats and the labor unions and anything on the left to continue the divide and conquer strategy that they rely on. The problem is the base got away from it. Donald Trump showed up, and rather than buying into that political elite, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, yeah, we say these things about abortion, but then we don't actually do anything about abortion. Oh yeah, it'll come up during the judges thing, but legislatively we're not going to really do anything. We'll talk a lot about the NRA, but we're not going to actually do much on these issues, right? So at election time, they feed the base, and through the between elections too, but they whip their base up into a frenzy on identity politics issues, and then they ride that democratic legitimacy through to enact policies that they want. Donald Trump didn't do the nudge, nudge, wink, wink. He went right for those horrible beliefs and worked from them, not from the sort of conspiracy of harnessing white grievance power. He did an end run around Mitch McConnell, around Kevin McCarthy, and all of these people. Hey, Bruce, how are you doing? I hope you're doing well. I was actually thinking of sending you a message, and I'm lazy. So just know I was thinking of you. I was going to check in to see how you were doing. Color Connection, thank you for stopping by. So Trump did an end run around the political elites. He just went right to the mob and said, I will be your leader. I will say the things that you think and you say in private, but Mitch McConnell won't say, because he considers himself too classy for this stuff. And he gave them the taste of a demagogue who would work to deliver the kind of hateful policies that the Republicans promised but never really quite got around to enough. Republicans were always more concerned about tax cuts and tax breaks and deregulation on business than they were about enacting the white grievance identity, agenda. That's not to say that they didn't do good things, babes. That's not to say they didn't do things to, in the eyes of their constituents that were good. They would throw them the occasional bone. But they didn't. It was always about using that white alienated vote or ginning up alienation in the white population to get them to vote for them. Now they have Trump. Now they've got a taste of like pure cocaine. This isn't methadone. This is heroin, right? Trump is is their id pusher, right? He says he just like, ooh, brain endorphins, chemicals, dopamines, all kinds of stuff, right? It's like a high when he says these things, when he degrades women, when he, says racist things. And Mitch McConnell now, he looks like cheap methadone. Why would they go for methadone when they can get good stuff, heroin, right from Trump's mouth? And so Mitch McConnell is just, thinks somehow that he's going to get his party back because Trump is gone now. Nikki Haley is going to backpedal her comments about Trump having gone too far within months, I can tell you. Because even if Trump in 4 years, I would predict he will run again. Of course, why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't he? He can raise money. He can spend a bunch of other people's money. He can siphon off things from other Republican candidates because he has the devotion, the loyalty. His people were willing to storm the Capitol and fight police for him. Who else in America can say that? Who else in America has a violent mob that is waiting to be directed by him? There's only one man. It's only Donald Trump. The most dangerous thing that would happen, the most dangerous thing that could happen to the Trumpists and the Trumpist movement, it has nothing to do, in my opinion, with anything that the GOP can do. The only thing that will stop this movement is Trump to die. I mean, that is the only way the Trumpist movement will die, because if the head of the movement dies, there's really no obvious, Tucker Carlson could maybe try to step up into that place. He doesn't have the kind of history and credibility in their eyes that Trump has, being a businessman, being on TV, all this sort of stuff. But I don't want to discount Tucker Carlson. He might be able to whip them up in a kind of frenzy. But there's no Republican. There's no Republican. Ted Cruz and can we just look at Ted Cruz's mullet? I'm going to do a Kevin here. Put up a nightmare fuel image. Ted Cruz mullet. Come on. No, images. Oh, what? Yes. What is this monstrosity? What is going on? This is what the? Sorry, that was a really loud laugh. I felt it coming out. What the hell is going on with Ted Cruz's hair? Come on, no, show the picture. What is this crap? How come? Show the picture. There we go. Yes. All right, I don't know how I got distracted by Ted Cruz's hair. Sorry about that. I don't even remember what I was saying, but Ted Cruz, that sniveling little toady who's gonna be, gonna a butt kiss his way? No, you don't. Yeah, so they'll want statues of him. Absolutely. Yeah, it's a cult. Trumpists are a cult. It's not a political party. It's not a movement. The Trumpist movement is not like the Women's March, where people are coming together with a sense of common purpose of expressing their values nonviolently. The Trumpists are interested in preserving, and they might not consciously understand this is what they're doing, because they think about white supremacy and they think that it means American democracy. White people running things is, I think, in their minds, like democracy. And if anyone else with different opinions from them tries to get into power, that's a threat to democracy. Now, democracy is going to be fine if the processes for electing people to represent them continue to go forward. They just don't want they just don't want people on the left to have the power to run things the way that we want for a change. So the Trumpists are cults. They love Donald Trump. They don't care about his policies. The Republican National Committee conference, the presidential conference, they didn't even have a platform. It was just Trump worship. And as a consequence, the GOP is not going to get away from Trump anytime soon, if anything. So here's where the GOP is. They are politically a party that is shrinking. But the people who are leaving are more center-right, are more moderate. That means that the voting base is the percentage of extremists in their voting base increases as a percentage of the total number of people in the party as moderates leave. That means that the GOP is caught in this catch-22. In order to get elected, they have to appeal to the sentiments of their own voters who are extremists. And the more that they align themselves with the votes they need to get elected, the more they drive away people who aren't extremists. And it's a feedback loop. I was thinking about doing this, about a video, how the Republicans did this to themselves through gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is not a new phenomenon. It's been going on, for a very long time. But it seems to me what's quite different about modern gerrymandering, like since the civil rights movement, let's say, is that, well, I don't even know how much this was happening in the 60s and the 70s. I think this kind of started in the 80s and 90s, really, where this really coordinated attempt by like the American Legislative Exchange Council, which is basically fascism for fascist policies or anti-worker policies or pro-corporate policies. They would create cookie-cutter legislation and just send it out to the states. And you saw in state after state after state, increasingly districts went from being, even if they were slightly skewed to the Republicans, to being extremely skewed. Like, the districts became incredibly unrepresentative of the population by how they were drawn. Right? And in more and more states, and I should do an empirical study on this just to review the data, but the primary becoming the general, and the primary, of course, is when you run to the farthest extreme in order to get elected, and then the general is where you're supposed to come back and try to appeal to the median voter, right? But if your primary is your general, then the most extreme person will win, in theory, in a sort of like, in a spatial dimension approach to looking at politics. If your primary is your general, then your party is moving farther and farther away from your moderate, centrist, the middle of the country, really. And it definitely does, it provides no representation for anybody on the left. And there is no check. Once you have these primaries as the general situations, then if the voting base itself is becoming increasingly radicalized, and Fox News comes in here, and Newsmax, and Trump, and social media, and Rush Limbaugh, and they are radicalizing their base, then where you have to run to the right moves farther and farther right. Imagine being a loyal Trumpist, like this coward from Wisconsin who, on the day of the insurrection, called on Trump to end it, but then didn't even vote to impeach him. Imagine fearing, he's a quisling, like, suck-up. He's worried someone more to the right of him is going to run. They're only looking increasingly, their threats are coming from increasingly fascist, parts of their own party. And they're not even thinking at all about moderate voters or winning over independents or trying to expand. Because they've now drawn themselves into districts where extremism is rewarded. And you have enough elections where you get enough extremists, and then you throw into this mix a demagogue who creates a cult of personality that has loyalty to a man and no longer to principles, and you're going to get a fascist death spiral. GOP has, so what they thought, here's what I think they thought happened, right? The GOP underestimated how much extremism could really distort their party. When you run the country, when you're the country club elite of this nation, when you're the personal private jet elite of the country, and you've got this good thing going for decades, right? You want to keep Democrats out of power because you want to destroy unions. You want to keep the minimum wage down because you want your profits to be up. You don't want to redistribute the profits they create through their labor. You want to take it all. You don't want regulations. whatever. You're happy to throw, let's throw women's body, or people who can be pregnant, I should say. People who can become pregnant, let's just throw them under the bus. Let's throw gay people under the bus. Let's throw trans. Yeah, of course. Like, it doesn't, like, it's just human lives. They exploit human lives all day, every day. And they went along for decades just working on drawing all these little maps to get this piece of this congressional district, that congressional district, now over here, right? And assembling what they hoped would be this unstoppable, inevitable one-party rule where they were running everything. But this assumed, ceteris paribus, all things being equal, they should be able to ride that way forever. If it's not, look, if they had never had Donald Trump, let's do a but for. This is like but for, which made me laugh a lot. But this whole but for test that they came up with, not that they came up with, but that they brought to our attention during the course of the impeachment, right? And the but for test is apparently in a liability case. And I know for me, like every time I hear but for, I hear Kevin in my Kevin in my head laughing at the but for test. But in a case of liability, you say, well, okay, there's this actor, and you take them out of that situation, and you say, but for this person, what would the event still happen? Would the incident still have happened? If you take the drunk driver out of that situation, but for them, the accident wouldn't have happened. And imagine, let's do a scenario where Trump doesn't run for president in 2016, right? Who are you going to get as their nominee? Probably another Jeb Bush, right? You probably get another Bush. You probably get Jeb Bush, right? And he is like the classic, he's like a McConnell, right? You're talking about, again, these elites who harness the power of the populist mob while they sit in the country clubs, drinking, I don't know, what do old rich white dudes drink? Scotch or something, and have cigars. Brandy? No, I think brandy's a Wisconsin thing. And without an alternative, a lot of evangelical Christians would have, basically stayed in the same role they've had since the moral majority of the 80s, just handing their votes over to Republicans, despite the fact that they never really get the progress on abortion that they want. They have more effectiveness at the state level than the federal level, and certainly at the presidential level. Although it's a chipping away, right? Chipping away. But you don't get this you don't get a mob at the Capitol with a Jeb Bush presidency. You don't get 2 impeachments with a Jeb Bush presidency. You don't get a GOP platform with fealty to one man with a Jeb Bush presidency. But for Donald Trump, this scam they were running, this game that they'd rigged in their, drawing on the historical dominance of white conservative men who had been elected and helped other conservative white men get elected because they wouldn't let anybody else run for centuries, and developing these political families and financial networks, and then, a couple of women get elected, a couple of people of color get elected. But, it's basically it's like a legacy system in some ways. They kind of pick out who they want, they back a new guy, maybe they get some token women in there, some token people of color to give them a veneer of like, oh, this is Tim Scott, we're not racist, right? A little stamp of covering their butts. But because of Trump, this thing's gotten away from them, and they have no recourse. They are trapped. They are trapped because they can't reason with their base. They can't now say Trump is bad. If they ask people to pick, if they ask their voters to pick between them and Trump, they'll pick Trump. You can tell that Mitch McConnell knew Trump was guilty, and yet he devised a way in which he was the one who said, we're not going to try him before he leaves office. And then after he's left office, his argument was, well, now he's out of office, so we can't do it. He wanted to give Trump a way out because he fears the mob. And all he'll do is, he'll vote. The Senate said the trial was constitutional to carry forward, and Mitch McConnell, and those were the rules of the Senate. And Mitch McConnell said, no, I'm just not going to abide by that. Well, what if Democrats do the same? What if when Republicans get and they decide a rule and okay, these are the rules now that we're going to agree to, and Democrats just go, no, we're not going to agree to the rules of the Senate. What's the point of having those agreements then? Anyway, so he was the one he organized Trump's acquittal. He was a co-conspirator. He knew the argument he was going to be making. He wanted both to be able to mollify some of his country club friends, while at the same time not alienating the mob. And you can't do it. So, yeah, when we look at this, I've had this up the whole time. And put Trump's ugly mug up there. But yeah, let's have a little read of this. A CNBC survey conducted in the days before Trump's impeachment trial finds a large share of Republicans want him to remain the head of their party. Sorry, I muted myself there for politeness. And this is their problem. Most Americans hate Trump. The majority. Right? If we were a party that was centered on like, all right, I think I've showed you this before, but let me show you first. Just look at Ted Cruz's haircut. All right, let's do median voter spatial median. I'll illustrate this with an image. Median voter theorem spatial. Is that how you spell spatial? We're finding out. Images. I'm looking for, yes, yeah. Perfect. Okay, cool. All right, so this is I've talked about this before, median vote theory. It's not like a rule, but it is a handy way to think about things. Like most models, it's an attempt to describe reality. It's not a perfect depiction of reality. But the idea here is that if, when you have a population, a normal distribution looks like, well, I guess I can go back here. Here. Yeah, this is a bit more. Yeah. Okay, so this will help make the point a bit. A far-right populist contradicts the median voter theorem. Yes, I mean, this just kind of like, it is a, that's super small. This is a theory to explain political behavior in a very specific situation. Right? So there are some assumptions that go into the median voter theory, and if the assumptions don't fit your scenario, then it's not going to apply. And in this case, this I think had previously kind of been how US politics has operated, and I think for the left, it's still kind of how the politics operates, because there's a lot of lefties who get mad at Biden for not being as extreme as they want him to be, but that's because he's still operating from this median voter theory. So the idea here is that you've got people. So if you have a normal population, if you've got a population and there's a normal distribution of political views, and that's a bell curve. The idea is that there are some extremists on the left and some extremists on the right, but most people tend to go, toward the center, or at least to think they're centrist. Objectively in the median politically and subjective evaluation of where you stand on it, a lot of people will think that they're quite moderate and centrist. Some people are more honest, but a lot of people just go, oh yeah, my views are pretty common, I'm in the center, when they're on the more left or right. But in any normally distributed population, you will have a more left-leaning population, a more right-leaning population, and the majority of the voters are in the middle, even though your base is on the edges, right? And this is how you get the tradition of, in a primary. Now, of course, Labour members and Conservative members, there are no primaries in the UK. So imagine this as Democratic members and Conservative and Republican members. To win a primary, you need to be over here, the median left voter, or even, in the case of the Republicans at this point, you need to be, and this will depend on the district, I should say. So like being the median left voter in Ocasio-Cortez's or AOC's district is a very different left from being a median left voter in a state like, like Kentucky or something, and winning that election primary. On the other side, the Republicans too, and again, replace conservative here with Republicans, their median conservative voter is farther away from the center. So in order to get the primary, you run left or you run right, but there aren't enough votes in your party to get you the majority of votes when you're in a first past the post system. So, but it's customary, it had up until Trump been tradition for each candidate to run to the left and then run to the center. It was Stuart Stevens who mentioned that Mitt Romney, once he won the Republican nomination to run against Barack Obama, that it was an Etch-a-Sketch moment because he would take all the policies he ran on and you just shake them up and you kind of throw them up. Because at this point, I don't want to be harsh, but I'm going to be, because it's the truth. If you already won the left or you already won the right, those people, you don't have to talk to them anymore. Like, they still have to turn out and whatever, but they're not going to vote for your opponent. So as long as you get them to turn out, you can pretty much count on their votes, and you can now chase people who might not be voting for you. So the thing is, though, the GOP, this curve is their world now because of how they've drawn the lines. And so as a consequence, this median voter theory is kind of like, it's not that it's breaking down, it's what's considered the median for them now is the primaries and not the general. All right, so I think I answered that. Everything. All right, 10 minutes left. What else can I get? So the Trumpists right now are controlling the party, and the more that they move Republicans to the right, the farther away they get from the electorate. And as long as things are gerrymandered, that doesn't matter. It doesn't. Where the Republicans really have problems and will continue to have problems going forward are in statewide elections where they can't gerrymander it. And that's where you get to voting suppression. On a statewide level, the solution isn't gerrymandering. There, you just try to kick out people's votes. So that's how you win a governor's race, an AG race, a U.S. Senate race, Supreme Court races for places that elect it. The combination of gerrymandering in the House and voter suppression for the statewide races should, in their plans, produce that one-party rule by conservative, rich, white guys. The way that it's always been in America, the way it should be. While Americans generally hate Trump, when it comes to Republicans, though, I guess I'll read down. So the CNBC All-American Economic Survey, why is it All-American? That's silly. Shows 54% of Americans want Trump to remove himself from politics entirely. This was a sentiment of 81% of Democrats and 47% of independents, but only 26% of Republicans. This is the problem with the Never Trumper caucus. They only represent between 15 and 25% of the GOP base. And if anyone in 2024 tries to run in that lane, they're going to lose because Trump's going to get like 3/4 of the vote. He's going to win the majority of the plurality, depending on how many candidates there are. So this is not the end of Trump. There's no reason to think that Trump is going to fade into the background. As much as Mitch McConnell wants to put this chapter behind him and go back to the good old days of country club Republican rule, the mob is still at the door. The cultists are still there. They are not watching CNBC and they're not watching Fox Business News. That's who the elite Republicans think of as their base. Used car business owners, people who run the McDonald's franchise, heads of industry, whatever else, and their wives or their husbands. It's the mob. And the country club people feel less and less comfortable in a party associated with QAnon, conspiracy, treason, violence, the fascists, but they need votes. So how do you do that? You pander to the Trump voters. When it comes to Republican, the article goes on, 74% of Republicans want him to stay active in some way, including 48% who want him to remain the head of the Republican Party. That is half. That is half of the Republican Party. If half of the Republican Party sees Donald Trump as its head, he's the head of the party. whatever Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy want. And Kevin McCarthy knows that. And that's why he went down to kiss Trump's boots in Mar-a-Lago after having basically almost, putting his life in danger. 11% want him to start a third party. Okay, so they still say, again, if you want him to start a third party, add that 11%. That's 59% of Republicans who want to follow Trump still. And then 12% who say he should remain active, but not as the head of any party. We're talking about Donald Trump's future at the moment. The survey shows that he still has a strong one in core support within his own party who really want him to continue to be their leader. And the GOP has no counter to this. This is why the Trumpists are winning. End of the day, what can Mitch McConnell say to win these people away from Trump? There's nothing. There's nothing Mitch McConnell politically, given his history, would do to win these people over. It's not in his nature. He's not that kind of politician. He's not a demagogue like Trump. He is a political... How do you... See, all the animal analogies I make are just... he is a man obsessed with power, but power being held by people who, like, the appropriate people to wield it. I'm sure, like, and you can see him kind of walking this line. On the one hand, he wants Trump in the rearview mirror. Trump has been a disaster. Trump has been an absolute disaster for Mitch McConnell. The first thing he did was he lost them the House in 2018. And then in 2020, he lost them the White House. And then in 2021, he lost them the Senate. He's been a disaster, and yet his base loves him. Fox News loves him. OAN loves him. Newsmax loves him. He has an entire industry devoted to kissing his butt. And what does Mitch McConnell have to counter that? He's got power. I mean, within the Senate, he's got an amazing amount of power, even as minority leader. But the party has gotten away from him. This beast of hate that they've been, the bucking bronco of white supremacist hate and misogyny and bigotry. They've ridden it. They've ridden that bucking bronco for a couple decades now, but it's thrown them. It has absolutely thrown them. And I don't see a way out of the fascist death spiral the party's in. They've gerrymandered themselves into the destruction of their own party. And the United States, as a country, is the worst for it. Well, that was my thoughts. Why is he loved so much? That's crazy. Yeah, the thing is that this is what, Trump... So the GOP had a two-level strategy, right? You had the underbelly that spoke the kind of rhetoric of the mob. Rush Limbaugh, Mark Levine, Prager, Hugh Hewitt, and what other old white guys can I think of? There's Sean Hannity, Tucker Carlson. There are a whole bunch of people out there giving the sort of, and what do they say by red meat? They're like, that's cannibalism. That red meat is other Americans. They're feeding they're feeding the hate of their base with the bodies of other Americans. So they're not throwing red meat. They're encouraging cannibalism in their base. Hate these people, right? And the GOP was able to do a plausible deniability. They were like the scum floating on the top of the fetid water, right? The GOP scum would sort of rise and then they would run stuff, right? So the scum would be on top and they would be counting on that fetid water to kind of keep their pool of corrupt algae, going. And Trump was the Tucker Carlson of politics. He stopped using political speak. He stopped using coded language. He stopped doing all of the formalities and niceties and norms, the institutional dignity that other people were carrying with them. Not all of them. Like Rand Paul's trash, obviously. A lot of people are trash. But Mitch McConnell is an institutionalist, and he believes in maintaining this facade of dignity. And Trump didn't. And the fact that he didn't made him that much more accessible. And they loved him for that. They loved him for being honest about how much he hated other Americans. And how much he hated immigrants. And how much he hated Muslims. And how much he hated China. And how much he, like, they loved to watch him hate other people because they hate those people too. And he gave them permission to hate, whereas the other GOP leaders were tamping it down. Yeah, when you talk to Trumpists, what they say is that Trump is the only one fighting for them. Yeah, and yet he did nothing for them. He did nothing. They're like, I did a wall. I'm like, no, he didn't do a wall. Well, how did he materially make their lives better? He didn't. But he feeds their hate. So, I'm with you, Christy. I hope the rest of your day is good. Thank you for being you. Oh, thank you, Monty Lou. Appreciate that. The GOP is in a death spiral. And it's going to take a few more election cycles. And how it plays out at the state level is going to be interesting. And the GOP civil war is going to be interesting. And I think, may we live in interesting times, right? Trump has Tucker Carlson's propaganda machine to help. He's got, yes, he had the entire Fox. I mean, Fox News has been in the bag, Fox has been in the bag news for decades. Like, since its founding, its entire purpose of being, of its entire reason for being, its raison d'etre, is to perpetuate a white supremacist, misogynist bubble of information that attempts to preserve the sort of systems that were put in, that were challenged by the Civil War, that were temporarily, challenged by Reconstruction, that were challenged by the Civil Rights Movement. They're trying to maintain that power structure and call it democracy. Founding Fathers owned people, and yet they thought they were like the coolest, most free-thinking, forward-thinking humanists in the world. So this ability to, have democracy for me, but on the backs of exploitation and worse than just, no taxation without representation of others, is we have centuries of practice with it. Okay. Reasons to be cheerful. Reasons to be cheerful is that they are moving farther and farther away from the center. And the more they push themselves into an extreme, the more they weaken themselves as the demographics of America change and as the populations shift. The suburbs of Atlanta are not what they were 25 years ago when the strategy was enacted. The suburbs of Milwaukee, Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia. Florida is always in play, right? And Florida is kind of like the Lucy of the football for the Democrats. But look how close people came in Texas. Look how close people came in Florida. They can't stop that demographic destiny. And yes, there will be certain districts and places where that gerrymandering will hold off that wall of inevitability for a bit, but they're going to have a really hard time in statewide races, especially when people like Stacey Abrams start taking the fight to them about voter registration and really wanting one person, one vote. And in those districts that are becoming less reliably Republican and more swing, where the like suburbs, if they can't get those middle class people to turn out, if they can't get those suburban types, they can't do it all with the Trump mob. They need to appeal to those suburban voters as well. The most populous portion of the GOP right now is with non-college educated whites. And more people are getting college degrees every year. So another issue that will be taken up over the course of, not one election, 2 elections, maybe 3 or 4. Okay, well, that is me. That is an hour, and I'm even going long enough. I'll just say, I didn't see anyone. I saw some comments in the chat, but mostly it's just you guys saying really funny or interesting or smart things. No particular questions. Are there more major Marjorie Taylor Boebert the future? Yeah, I mean, they've always had that kind of element. I mean, look at Louis Gohmert. He's an example of that. There are other who is that guy? Oh, Steve King, openly white supremacist, right? So she's just the latest manifestation of that extremist wing. Before, we can probably go back, I remember the John Birch Society was, and the Posse Comitatus. I remember hearing those names growing up. So this kind of extremist portion of the American right is something that we've lived with forever. I mean, this is the lynching sector. These are the inheritors, the people who used to lynch people and get away with it. That's the tradition Donald Trump is in. What we don't tend to have in the United States is more of the left extremist. Probably not since, like the 1920s and the massive strikes because of the absolute appalling conditions of workers. We don't really have that kind of... People can point to Antifa, but that's not nearly as... That's not an equivalent to the kind of extremists you see on the far right. There's no Antifa version of Rush Limbaugh, So, thanks for the great explanation. Great. Didn't King get booted? Steve King eventually said something like... Yeah, let's just look it up. I think he basically said, like, there's nothing to be embarrassed about being a white supremacist or something. He said something ridiculously awful. And I think that they took him off his committees. So let me see here. Steve King. White supremacy? Or white nationalism? I'll do both. Supremacy. Because I can't remember exactly what he said. All right, yes. Here's a timeline of Steve King's racist remarks. Just do the timeline. How far back does it go? 2002. The United States is the unchallenged greatest nation in the world that has derived its strength from Christianity, free enterprise, capitalism, and Western civilization. And this is exactly the kind of stuff they've been saying since the 80s. Let's go down to the end to see what ended his career. 2017, 2018. In the same interview, King demonstrated familiarity with the Great Replacement conspiracy theory, known as white genocide. Quote, Great Replacement, yes, unquote, King says. These people walking into Europe by ethnic migration, 80% are young men. They are somebody else's babies, unquote. King endorsed a Toronto mayoral candidate who recited the 14 words used by neo-Nazis. Condemned someone for saying you have to stand up against white supremacy. Here it is. What is a white nationalist? First of all, I think you have to be white. It's a derogatory term today. I wouldn't have thought it so maybe a year or two ago or 3, but today they use it as a derogatory term and they imply you're a racist. Yeah, that's what he said. Yeah, if you have a Q&A, yeah, go ahead. If people have questions, I can, I actually don't have to prep for a game today, and my dad is getting the COVID vaccination, so I don't have to call him today. I got like a relaxing afternoon. So yes, if people do have questions, I don't know if I'll be able to answer them, but here's the thing. I need coffee. So how about we do this? I will give you all, as long as it takes me to refill my coffee, to type up any of your questions. Sorry, I kind of advertised I was going to leave and some people started saying goodbye, but then that's a good point. So, yeah, let's go ahead and have a Q&A session. I'm going to make coffee. You guys type your questions, and we will be right back. So I have to... I'll do this one. That way the music will sync a little bit better. Transition and its theme. Okay, all right. Then, yeah, go pre-show. Oh, I heard the music. I heard the music started already. You guys. Yeah. BRB, and then we'll do Q&A. Hey y'all, I wish I could be playing that guitar off camera. I do play guitar, but woof. Yeah, that I can't do that. I'm to the point where I'm working on my bar chords. That's the kind of guitar I play. All right, your questions. I guess in order to see your questions, you have to see your questions. So let me swap over into the other camera. Stream. Oh, there it is. Okay, I'm gonna make this. Sorry, I'm just gonna adjust this a little bit. I'm gonna make myself bigger because I've got a massive ego. All right, there we go. And oh, you know what? I'm also gonna do is I'm gonna move this. Don't need that now, unless we do later on, and I'll put it up here. Okay, so all right. And then I can't stay too long though because I have a birthday rap to record for somebody that is due today. So due. It's so due today. All right. What are your questions? Okay, what are your questions? What do you got here? Boom, boom. All right. Americans don't care about each other nearly enough. I mean, I'm not disputing that. I'm not disputing that at all. I think that's culturally a function, again, of a westward expansion. It's also a reason I think, there was, because of concentrated populations in Europe and the fact that people, even if they weren't working in those, even though a lot of people were working industrially, seeing that was very different from the predominantly rural and agricultural nature of American westward expansion and entrepreneurship that characterized that period of time. Okay, so do I see on 6 January many rioters turned up in tactical gear, body armor? They were expecting, yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of surprised in some way there wasn't more gun violence, to be honest. That they only brought weapons to beat people with, maybe that's because they knew they couldn't win in a gunfight. But the white power movement after Vietnam, increasing power of the Christian extremists. I mean, the Christian extremism has characterized most of American history. Like the Great Awakening was a big thing. The links between religiosity and religious belief and abolition. There's a whole lot of roots, even within the Black community. The churches have been incredibly important as areas of social organization. So the role of Christianity is just so different in America from the U.S. Why did so many? I'm sorry. I'm looking at. I know that sometimes you have a hard time typing, Bruce. So I'm trying to interpret that. Where did so many? Is that the racists come from? Ah, there you go. Yeah. Where did so many of the races come from? You'd think some researchers would have picked up on the term. Yeah, I think, racial animus as a concept has been measured for a while. So it's not a new phenomenon. Yeah, sorry, try to get here. Let me go. There have been survey questions on and studies of racial animus motivating things for a while. For instance, I know even on the British election study, we have measures of, do you think women should stay home and have babies? And do you think that, BME, well, it was BME, but now it's BMEA representation has gone too far. So racial, survey questions. This is more, though, in sociology than political science. Political science would study these attitudes as a subset of a political outcome, whereas I think sociologists are more interested in the attitudes themselves. And I can't spell today either. Survey questions. Racial animus. I don't know if that's perfect. Yeah, the cost of racial animus on Black candidates, answering questions about race, how race and ethnic. So what is this from? 2018. I have a little look here. Oh, it's a download, I think. It's a PDF, right? So I'll big this up a bit. Given the fundamental role that race and ethnicity play in U.S. society, sensitive survey items on the subject can often lead individuals to underreport their true attitudes. It's called social desirability bias. Survey world. Previous studies have shown that the absence of an interviewer reduces the pressure to provide socially desirable responses. In 2012 and 16, the American National Elections Survey studies, where both interviewer and self-administered surveys were used, allows us to test whether mode effects emerge the way the respondents answer survey items related to racial attitudes. We also expect mode effects to vary based on the extent to which individuals are politically socialized in the United States. We find that respondents tend to underreport their racial animus in interview-administered versus online surveys. Moreover, underreporting is non-existence in the responses provided by foreign-born Latinos, but emerges for U.S.-born Latinos, blacks, and whites. These findings pose a number of implications for our understanding of racial attitudes and survey modes. So this is both it's both a measurement and a mode paper, but looking back, let's see. Race is the fundamental cleavage in American society. Many scholars have recognized the importance of race in shaping American political opinion and behavior, stretching back into the early years of modern social science. Adorno, Frankl, all these people back from the 1950s. Whether expressed in outright racism or prejudice, Alport 54, or less overt symbolic racism or similar concepts, Bobo 1983, Canoe Sears 1981, race and ethnicity continue to play an important part in determining attitudes about policies and issues, as well as political behavior. So it's just with the social medias, we see everyday racism in ways we hadn't before. You know, the insights we have now into the kind of racist experiences of Black Americans in the pre-civil rights movement before the ending of segregation is just from pictures. Maybe you could probably go back and find some like letters to the editor or whatever. But social media, people post this stuff all the time. So it's not, I don't think that there's more of it happening. I actually think there's probably less of it happening, you know, because college educated whites are like moving toward issues of racial equality in ways that they hadn't before. It's just easier to see. So I always forget what questions I've had in the past. We'll remember to write them down. Okay, well, maybe we can make this a thing. Like I'm trying to not do 2-hour shows because I find people don't watch that. So what we can do is we can do like a 1-hour content and then 30 minutes Q&A if you guys remind me. So I typed it before, but how do you think that Trump's acquittal will affect the worldwide far-right populism? Because I think if something can happen in the U.S., it can happen anywhere. Well, I mean, to be fair, Europeans led on that kind of right-wing things in the past century. So, but I don't want to, like, you know, I'm not trying to disagree with you. I'm just saying that maybe in some ways it's kind of more catching up here. I think we had a little bit of a fascist party, but those tended to be politically alienated and really on the extreme. So I don't know. I mean, I think that there are a lot of people, I think there are people around the world. I mean, look at Carl Benjamin. He's like a Trumpist. He's a cult member. He's all about Daddy Trump. And in that way, he's a symbolic head. But I don't know that Trump per se will have real world consequences. Like, in order for me to do a chain of causality and actually measure, okay, so here's Trump impact on, let's say you like Sargon and his audience, right? And then you figure out where his audience is in terms of where they live, and then how that affects their votes and how those votes affect the election. It ends up being, I think, pretty small. So I don't know if he has I don't know that Trump will have a substantive effect, but he might have a symbolic effect in terms of being a sort of a face of the kind of fascism that they are trying to advance. So thank you, Ali. I hope that answered your question. Christy's been dead on, balls accurate in the stream. Glad I tuned in. I love everyone in this chat, and it's so nice to know that not everyone is, yes, crazy, crazy. Remember that song by, was it Seal? No, I can't remember now. In 1984, Winston ended up before the committee and they said their real leadership was power, so they kept it. Do you think corporate GOP think of themselves? Oh, absolutely. I absolutely were, what was the cartoon? I can't remember the name of the cartoon strip, but it's about like this king. I can't remember. And there's just the king is ruling, and one of his advisors comes in and says, Your Highness, the peasants are revolting. And he says, yes, they are. That is how I think Mitch McConnell views. He views these people with contempt. He uses them. He doesn't feel comfortable with Trumpists, but he needs them. And so he finds a way to try to have it both ways. He tries to find a way to get Trump off from his charges, and at the same time do a little sop to the people that he has to face in the country club by giving him a very stern talking to. It's like the judge who knows that if he convicts the white guy of lynching, he's going to be lynched next, but he also has to CYA because of his job. And so he gets the murderer off on a technicality while also condemning lynching, which changes nothing, but it keeps him in power. I can't, look, if you want to talk about, I don't know, sort of a Wormwood character, like the sleaziest, the Svengali, a character, the Rasputin, the person without any morals, whose only purpose is to seek, maintain, and wield power for their personal agenda. Mitch McConnell is the best. He's the best. He's evil. He's pure Machiavellian. He is Machiavelli. Absolutely. Like, there are no principles. There is only power. And if you can use principles to keep the power, all the better. But, they're disposable. Power's not. What do you think it would take for Trump supporters and sympathizers to dump Trump? No, it'll never happen. It will never. Look at all of the things Trump has done. And nothing he's done. Not organizing an insurrection. Not having an affair when his wife had just given birth. Not conspiring with the traditional enemy of the United States, Russia, the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union. Nothing. He can do no wrong in their eyes. It is a cult. It is a cult. And the only way to disempower a cult is to deprogram its members. But the whole point of the Fox News bubble, the OAN, Newsmax, Rush Limbaugh, Mark Levine bubble, is to keep that cult going. And it's fed on white grievance and racial animus and misogyny. If it could happen in America, it'd happen anywhere. See, this is American exceptionalism to my mind. You're more fertile for this than plenty of places. I don't know if that's the case. 1930s Germany. If you want to say in the modern era, I think that places that have PR are less likely to have this happen. But I look at the government of Israel and how far right-wing it is. And then, it's quite different from, let's say, overt Trumpism. They're still playing we're pretending like we're legit politicians. But yeah, there is a particular type of American populism. And it's not just limited to the right wing. There is also a left-wing populist movement that feeds off of primarily a divide and conquer. It's language that the entire base is having an enemy, in my opinion here, right? So for me, right-wing populists' enemy are those who advance multiculturalism and like substantive equality, liberty, and justice for all. On the left wing, it's the enemy is corporate capitalism, rich people, big banks, and versus the little guy, because left-wing populism is really white-centered, and it's really, like, masculinity-centered, in my opinion. And it feeds off of that division and demonization. And they're not as popular or strong or as intense because we lack unions and a lot of other things in the US to give them the kind of base. And it's also a harder form of identity politics, I think, than religion per se. But yeah, populism is generally pretty dangerous. And it's weird because where is the line between popular legitimacy, as in democratic legitimacy based on the majority will, and populism? I didn't do populism per se, but there are people who specialize this in political. Yay, happy to be able to see and hear more from me. You guys are good for my ego. How do you de-radicalize about 25% of the population? Good question. That's a very good question. And if I had the answer to that, I would be making way more money and I'd be on TV. But I'm not. I'm exclusive. I'm a very boutique content provider to discerning audiences who come by my channel. Ultimately, the way I think the only effective remedy, kryptonite to this kind of thing are people with political clout who will put themselves on the line to challenge Trump. It's not always about let's say taking him out in terms of impeachment, but just be willing to say the former president is wrong on these policies and I have a better idea. Someone who can go up and actually just start to challenge things. And I don't, this is, so that could be part of it. I think there are a lot of people who, over the decades, could have gone another way, right? There's an entire cohort of Americans who chose to listen to Rush Limbaugh, who chose to go down the QAnon path, who chose to do the ego, sort of like feel-good thing of Trump. They weren't destined to be fascists. They made a series of small steps that took them down a path now that is fascist. So that's part of it. The other thing is that in any given population, you're going to just have like people whose political views are authoritarian, who don't really want democracy, who don't want to see other people have the same rights, who don't want a government that works for all the people. And you're never going, I don't know that it's realistic to say that you could get to all of those people and change their minds. If they exist in the French population, in Britain, in Germany, we all have our extreme right-wing parties. It's a containment issue. It's a marginalization issue. It is a pushing them out of the mainstream and to the point where they don't have that kind of power. So even though, the corporate elite Republicans rode that white animus, white grievance, power or hate in their turnout, a lot of middle-class suburban people didn't feel they were involved in a party that was based on hate. They thought it was about individual freedom and opportunity and getting the government out of your way. So they were marketing their product differently to different people. And I would rather have, like 65% of people who are reasonable and then work on marginalizing the other ones rather than trying to de-radicalize everybody. That'd be nice, but I don't know if it's realistic. All right. Someone's recommending The War on Everybody audiobook by Robert Evans. And his episodes on the history of American fascism. I burped at you, sorry. All right. And the bagpipes. What? What do I think will happen in the next 8 years? Events, dear boy, events. It's hard to say what's going to happen in the next 4 weeks, or the next 8 weeks, and the next 8 months, and the next 8 years. A lot of things that are not directly under any politician's controls. Things that, so let me look at a macro level here. The best way to predict who is going to be president in any American election, not all elections, just in this case, I'm going to talk about American elections, is how the economy is doing. And if the economy is doing really well, chances are you'll get the incumbent win again. And if the economy is going down the tank, then that's a change election. Now, that's not the only reason why people vote for president. However, when we model it, it is sad the extent to which economic performance predicts the results of American presidential elections. So it's hard to say what's going to happen politically without knowing what's going to happen economically. If, Biden's come in within 3 weeks, he's created a plan and a vaccination purchase to get every American vaccinated by July. And it's been not even a month since he's been in office. He did it in less than a month, and Trump had 9 months to organize it, and he failed. But let's say the vaccinations roll out, and then the economy comes back, right? So there are going to be there are a lot of people who have been put out of work because they were in the service industries, they were in public-facing jobs that were high risk, that had to get shut down. There's portions of the economy that people have white-collar jobs, I think, have done pretty well. College-educated people have survived this pretty well. So if there's enough wealth in there for people to start going out to movies again, going out to eat at restaurants, going back to amusement parks because the vaccine works, and we can start moving to a post-COVID form of life, then that kind of economic expansion could bode very well. However, you can turn it around. So it's very difficult to know what's going to happen without knowing what's going to happen to the economy. So that's my dodge. How'd I do? How are there people who study social science but still come out right wing? Well, when it starts with your assumptions. So if you look at someone like Douglas Murray, who comes in with a certain perspective on the world and certain assumptions about what is good and what is right, then all of the studies will just be about how do I impose my worldview on others. That's what I think. Just got up. Good morning, Lee. Welcome to the show. We're just going to be wrapping up here. So the bias was there's a union bulk, but Trump campaign gave that policy. So the bias was there's in there, but Trump campaign sort of politicized it and systematized it. Trump is probably the first real demagogue, I'd say, since McCarthy. But McCarthy was just a senator. He didn't run for president. But the kind of anti-communist hate and persecution of Americans and willing to turn the power of government against the left, I can't really think of anybody who was successful, actually ran for office that did that. But yeah, the way that I view it is there is very much a GOP political elite that go, okay, we are the ones who run for office. We're the ones who run business. We're the ones who run the churches. We're the ones who keep this country going. And we need the mob. We need the unwashed masses. But, they can get elected to the House from time to time. But, really, it's a very exclusive boys' club. And same as it ever was in the GOP. So Ali says, more like American still has a strong institution and democratic tradition. I believe that if the fascists in America can override such a system, I see no reason why other fascists can't. I'm watching. Hello, Lee. Trans Gamer Girl. I missed it. Where'd it go? Okay. The Christian extremists have always been a problem, but Trump acted as a beacon for them, like a lighthouse, rallying them all to his as the mouthpiece for their hatred. And not just Christian extremists. I mean, I think just generally sort of the populist right. Not, I don't know that all of these Trumpists are, in terms of that, but the Christian right has also always been in the pocket of the GOP. I think it was what Trump brought to, okay, so let me go back up. Karl Rove ran George W. Bush's campaign, and his goal was to get deeper and deeper into the white populace. Get deeper and deeper into white people who didn't turn out to vote in elections. And those types of people are the ones who felt alienated from the process, right? They thought it was all rigged, because in the GOP it is, and in some places in the Dems too. They thought government was the enemy and the problem. These are the people who talk. That's the kind of portion of the white population they hadn't agitated to vote yet. The people who talk about the Illuminati. right? And those people weren't like going to go for the GOP. So I think it's yes, I don't want to disagree in that he got a lot of Christians to vote, but what Trump did was he brought in a lot of conspiracy theorists and radicals who weren't traditionally, turning out for those kinds of elections, but the Q was telling them to turn out for a candidate, which was new. That's my take. Didn't it already happen in Brazil? Don't know. Liking the show, Christy. The almighty algorithm. Thank you. I don't even like looking at Sargon. I don't blame you. I was thinking more like it could encourage people to go to extreme. Obviously, that's true. I mean, if you have a more extreme position, a politician takes up an increasingly extreme position, that gives people the option to choose it. People only have a choice between Coke and Pepsi. There are some people who are just not going to choose either. But if you have Coke and Pepsi and then Dr. Pepper, and I don't want to associate Dr. Pepper with the white supremacy, then, people might go for the more extreme version of the product, but they can only do that if it's put out there. And that's what the GOP had done. They'd kind of, curated a kind of candidates who were Ivy League educated and could look rough, who could talk to the common people. Like Ted Cruz is not a populist, but he'll get down in the grub and talk to the plebs, people living in trailer parks, and tell them how great and what wonderful Americans they are. And then he's going to go laugh at them while he eats, steak at some hoity-toity restaurant with a dress code. So, but yeah, if you give people more extreme options, you create opportunity for that extreme option to become the popular option. Gnarls Barkley? Yes! Crazy! That was it. Yes, thank you. Because Daddy Trump did it and got away with it. Yes, I can smell it from here. Trump supporters are revolting. Yes. Yep, that is how he acted like a beacon. Grima Wormtongue, precisely. Or Wormtongue? Why am I subscribed to this channel? Don't know. But, you have discerning taste if you are. Pretty sure Trump suddenly became a decent person or started acting like a normal human being. He'd lose his supporters. Yes, absolutely. They'd have to find a new Trump to out-Trump Trump. Ever done a deeper dive into white nationalism, its actual relationship with Candace Owens' Diamond and Silk? That's kind of, I did bring this up to Kevin and asked him if he knew about it. Studies that look at the rhetoric of non-white people who become spokespeople for white supremacy. And I'm unaware of anyone who's done that kind of research, and it's not really a field that I I have a framework for. I was looking at this book, I was trying to do propaganda, how it works, and so I could have a framework for evaluating Sargon's content. And the problem with propaganda is it's so hard to define propaganda. And as someone who is interested in, did my PhD in measurement validity, what I'm looking for in that kind of book is here is a definition of propaganda. Here's a second definition of propaganda. Here's a third definition of propaganda. Now, what are the necessary and sufficient conditions for something to be called peace propaganda according to definition 1, definition 2, definition 3? Now that we have these necessary and sufficient conditions, how do we operationalize them into things that we can measure? And then once we have the measurements, how do we go ahead and collect the data so that we can analyze which of the 3 or 4 or 5 definitions of propaganda, how they perform based on this. And that's not how that book works. And propaganda is very difficult to create that sort of just here's an operationalized list of things that are not propaganda, because so much of it is context. So I'm rethinking how to do that analysis of Sargon and the Big Lie, because I have looked into and I haven't found something that satisfies me in terms of actual structure. And I think it would be even more of a challenge to look at the relationship between white nationalism and people who pandered, like Terrence, what's his name, and Candace, and Diamond and Silk. I think methodologically, the way that I would go about that analysis, excuse me, is maybe by looking at the speeches and discourse, which would make it really, really painful, but looking at Diamond and Silk's discourse, Candace Owens, and Terrence or whatever else, and then take a typical white commentator and look at the themes to see how they are similar and different on topics, and if there is any difference. when it comes to discussing specific, racial points, or do they simply echo right-wing talking points already, but through their particular, venue? Same with grifters on YouTube. They paint themselves into a corner. Can't change now. Yep. Seems like the only way Trumpsters will dump Trump is if someone worse and smarter comes. Yeah, Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson is a more scary version of Trump because he's actually smart. The right now kind of worships the present day Russia because it's what they want for America. There are people who like the idea of a strongman. Certain things, certain socializations prime you for submission and obedience and unjustified hierarchies. And, that goes along with fascism. What America is today, the world will be tomorrow. No, don't say that. The fact the U.S. can get away with this crap will certainly encourage other pieces of POSs to, where'd you go? To get away with something too. Okay, I'm gonna have to start scanning now because we've already gone over 30 minutes. Could probably de-radicalize the population by bringing back the Hays Code. Yeah, is that the one from the movie theaters? LOL. Lots of folks have better ideas. They haven't worked because the messenger wasn't popular. Yep. Seems bleak. Unfortunately, it is. White supremacy is a hell of a drug. The problem here ultimately is that we still haven't properly dealt with the fact that white people, generations of white people did not view Black Americans as equal human beings. I think, when I think back to how I was before I really had my eyes open to the structures of white supremacy and white dominance of power, it's this sort of, I kind of blame Jesus. When he says, treat your neighbor as you would yourself. It sounds like a good idea. It sounds like empathy. But what it's really doing is seeing yourself in your neighbor and loving that. And when your neighbor doesn't conform to who you are, you're not asked to accommodate and still love them. If your self-love is the basis, then how do you learn to love somebody for who they are and on their terms, not on your terms? And white supremacy defines Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, Latina Americans, anyone else through the lens of whiteness. If you do the white things in the white way, then you're an American. But if you come from Africa in your ancestry, and you want to celebrate that, because it's not European, you're now not really an American. And so it is that almost unconscious starting point that we're socialized into, because as white Americans, we're socialized into through the history of white supremacy. So I'm going to try to get through these faster because you guys ask good questions and make good comments. There will always be people who believe that people shouldn't be allowed to do X and people to pander to them. Correct. Some people say that Dems should have gotten the DOJ to investigate Trump for criminal intent instead of impeaching him again. And some say that the second impeachment should have happened. Thoughts? Okay. One is you can walk and chew gum at the same time. It was important for Congress to act on its own. DOJ is an executive branch office. DOJ going after Trump is Biden going after Trump. Even if you say, and it is the case that the DOJ is independent of what they want to do, it is a Biden cabinet position, and it is therefore politicized. The House is the first, the House and the Senate, the legislative branch, are created by the first article of the Constitution. They are a co-equal branch, and they have a role to play in bringing consequences for the person who attacked their institution. So I would disagree. I think that putting it in the DOJ actually politicizes it more, makes it look more partisan, and it's more of a distraction for Biden. Another point on that, Biden, his hands are clean on this. He's doing his thing. he's out there doing COVID stuff and talking about, whatever he needs to get done to make sure people get vaccinated. Meanwhile, it's Mitch McConnell who's up there. It's Nancy Pelosi who's up there. So no, I don't think that the DOJ investigation as a replacement for impeachment would have been in any way a good idea. And some say that the second impeachment should have happened. Absolutely symbolically, even without the education, without the conviction. We learned things from that process. We, it's like the truth and reconciliation thing. Like, we had to deal with the truth to process what happened to us as a nation and the members of Congress to what happened to them that day. Because to sweep it under the rug would have been a second affront to what happened, in my view. Let's not be downhearted. The one problem is that it would only play into the hands of those who tout the left are the real fascists, as they could turn into them jailing their political opponents. Yeah. Christy, would you consider doing a video on Black POC voting preferences and behavior from a feminist perspective? I'm not quite sure how that intersection works. Sorry. So, I mean, here's what I hear in my mind, right? Here's how I translate this as a political scientist. What I hear you saying is that vote choice, or voting preferences, or the choice to vote is the dependent variable, the thing that we want to explain. And one of the independent variables is looking at a subsample of the voting population who are non-white. But then what you want me to do is to create like an interaction effect for that population based on feminist values. And so you'd have sort of like the likelihood of turning out to vote, or the likelihood of voting for a Democrat over a Republican, and then a coefficient on African American, biracial Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, and whatnot. And then this interaction effect would be like feminism, and feminism is a huge thing. Like, what do we mean by feminism? Are we just talking about sort of like second wave legal, like being able to have equality in the workplace? Or are we looking at, more substantive things like fundamentally transforming how housework is done, which women disproportionately bear the burden of? So I have a hard time figuring out how I would use a feminist lens on those voting preferences, because I'm not sure what the theoretical link. What is the question we're trying to answer? Like, if we want to predict vote turnout or vote choice of POC voters, what is the theoretical question of feminism here that we want to test? So I don't see a causal. Where's the causal mechanism that links these together? And that was my way of. It isn't really a dodge. It's just explaining why I struggled to interpret that question. Just got here. Hey, bye, pagan man. Good to see you. It's more difficult to do voter suppression and gerrymandering in Europe. Yes. In Italy, Berlusconi rigged the system to keep power. Yes. I see what you mean. Yes. It depends on the system. There is the electoral commission, but I think there's also some role of the parties in drawing the lines for the constituencies in the UK. There's also ways within PR systems. I'm sure they have their own ways of gaming the systems. So, and I deal mostly with first past the post, so I'm not going to speak to it. All right, so I'm going to skip people who are applying to other people. Also, the thing with radicals is that they are very active, which can create the form of the spiral of silence. Correct. Absolutely. There are a lot of Republicans who have not spoken out, who are sort of like looking to consent by not standing up, and yet all they're doing is basically making it look like that extremist view is more popular than it is, because they're afraid to speak up and speak out. I remember in the 90s, everyone was excited about the internet, how it was going to increase knowledge worldwide and be a tool for education, instead of turned to a cesspool of lies. Yep. Garbage in, garbage out. If 25% of the population is radicalized, surely they can always swing an election or drag that. Well, it's okay. 25% of the population, I guess this is like, let's part of the problem is like how we're thinking. Are we talking about the voting population? Are we talking about the full population? So when you look at it, the Republican Party is shrinking. They're becoming a smaller portion of the population, and people who are becoming more independent are becoming a larger portion of the population. And so it kind of also depends, like if you're talking about all adults or you're talking about the voting population, people who are politically engaged. But do we have a choice but to research some way money in this? The question, it could be done, but who's going to take the responsibility for funding it? The Republicans aren't interested in de-radicalizing their base because it's their advantage. It gets them to turn out. Democrats aren't going to waste money on Republicans because they're more interested in getting out first-time voters from the Democratic base or winning over independent voters. There's no civic society group with millions of dollars to fund de-radicalization, and yet there is a lot of profit to be made by putting out these conspiracy theories. Alex Jones, Fox News, Newsmax. Oh, and if you look at Fox News viewership, they are drifting away from Fox over into these more extreme outlets, and they're taking their dollars with them. So I just don't think that there's like a neutral civil society, good democracy group. And they would also probably be tarred by people like Sargon and Alex Jones as the FEMA camps that are coming to re-educate you. It feeds into their conspiracy that they are being targeted because of their wrong think, and they want, when their thinking structure is poisoning our democracy. All right. I'm going to see how much. Any other questions? Questions. Otherwise, we're just having a conversation. But like I said, I didn't want to go 2 hours because I love you guys, but my views go down overall. So I got to balance this. Non-white Americans are okay. Or terrorism bureau. Where's your other one? Do you have another one? Okay. No, I think I got it. Non-white Americans are then also socialized into positioning their identity in proximity in relation to whiteness. Absolutely. Yeah. I agree. Did I miss something else that you wrote? I'm just looking up to see if I... Nope. Okay. Other questions. A feminist perspective. To see if there are gender differences among Black POC voting preferences, perhaps feminist theory could help us account for this. I think a better metric, my prediction based on some of the interviews I've seen with Black and POC voting who end up at these Trump rallies, is that they own businesses, or maybe they served in the military, or they really don't care about anything except how the stock market's doing. I think economic things are a far better predictor than their views on gender equality. Because also, like I said, like with the church and stuff, I'm not entirely sure how gender roles are really challenged in the Black community. At any church, it's not just a Black community, any church that would challenge those kinds of traditional gender roles and cis-normative framework. So I would, if anything, if I wanted to test and predict it, I would look to see whether or not they were like entrepreneurs, or they had their own businesses, or they owned their own businesses, or maybe again there was some like military service. I think that would be my gut instinct would be those would have higher coefficients that would be statistically significant. All right. Love to watch the whole thing. Oh, okay, that's fine, Concrete Donkey. You can just watch it, catch up later. So, no worries. All right, Lot. I'm gonna go over that. No, actually, I have to do now. I have to do a hip hop rendition of a birthday song for a friend. So I'm gonna get going. Do that. I don't think she's watching. I think she's too busy on a Sunday to watch. But catch me tomorrow night on the Happy Hour with Kevin, where there'll be a lot more swearing and jokes about body parts. Wednesday and Friday are the days I normally turn up to the Happy Hour, and I will be back next Sunday. Here on the channel, there's no D&D. We are taking a break today, and so you can catch us on the D&D channel for the Dragon Heist game. again next Sunday. And if you have, if you have stuff like you want me to talk about on the shows, you can always at me on Twitter. I often struggle for like what I should come up with in content. I did a little like run of PragerU videos, and then I saw someone like, "Oh, this is so boring." So if you guys have requests for topics, otherwise I usually pick my topic for the show about 2 hours before the show starts. There's nothing like forward preparation. All right. Have a wonderful day, wherever it is, whenever it is you are. Stay happy, stay healthy, and stay well. I will see y'all later. Oh, now I gotta get to. I'm on the wrong channel. I'm on the wrong page. I did my lovely little outro, and then I messed it up. All right, where is it? Oh, I don't even think I have. Oh, I don't even think I have it up. I don't even think I can stop it. So professional, Christy. Super, super professional. Hey, you want to watch me stop the show? All right, you get to watch me cut you guys off. You get to see behind the magic. See what I'm doing behind the thing, and also make sure it's muted. Otherwise, it'll be really, really boring. Anyway, catch y'all later. Okay, here we go. Bye.